Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to let Jeff do his presentation. And so, Jeff, it's all to you.
All right, thank you, Felisa. Well, one of the reasons I chose this topic, and Felisa sent me some topics, and she said, Jeff, which one of these do you feel comfortable on presenting on, and which one do you feel you would like to? And at the time, I have to tell you this: I had a situation where I sat in a testing situation. We're very short, just like any other state in the nation, on school psychologists. So I've been helping with the testing, with this teletherapy, going down, getting the students, and so on. And we tested this student, and I've been in this business for a long time, and I'm like, my gosh, this girl she does not seem like she would qualify under IDEA services. And sure enough, she didn't. And sure enough, the parents were upset. She needs an IEP. She needs an IEP to have these accommodations, and she's not going to be successful, and so on. And at that time, I'm just like, well, her major needs were attention, anxiety, and some processing issues. And just because she's not eligible for services under IDEA doesn't mean that she can't receive some services and supports to help her academically and emotionally. So um, when Felisa gave me some topics, I said, yeah, this one I feel as though I'd like to talk about. And I may not be the expert, but I have had lots of experience with this. And I know that Felisa in the chat asked like your roles and what are you employed, what's your job description or whatever it may be right now. And I did see a lot of 504 coordinators on there. And I know our districts up here in northern Michigan, and not only up here, but a lot of times a person is assigned a 504 coordinator because they have to meet that requirement. Who is your 504 coordinator? And a lot of times, some people don't even know they are the 504 coordinator. So, for those of you who are 504 coordinators, if you're an expert, I certainly commend you. But I'm hoping just to, if not to give you some new knowledge, just to reassure you that you're doing the right things. So, yeah, so we'll move on and to the slides here. And once again, it's a beginner friendly guide. So if you've recently been thrown into that role or that's another job duty assigned, hopefully this will help you. And at the end of the presentation, I will also refer back to my contact information because a lot of times you may not have a question today, but you're going to have it in the future. So, and I have a couple resources I'll mention to you at the end, and we'll go from there. So, just one second here. All right, just trying to get my controller to. All right. All right, so what is Section 504? And this is some of the basics, just for those of you beginners and so on. It's a federal civil rights act that prevents discrimination based on disability. In the middle column there is very important. Applies to program receiving federal funding. This also applies to colleges and universities. But the process is a little bit different. If you leave high school and you do have a 504 plan and you enroll in a college, what you would want to do is you would want to meet with like the student disability assistance team. Different colleges call them different things. And what would happen is you would present your plan to them. You don't have a 504 plan that says, specifically Jenny's 504 plan, but what they would do is a committee sit down. You have to disclose that information and they have to agree, yep, you need these accommodations. And then you have to disclose that to a professor or somebody at the university. And then as an adjunct professor, you would receive, that notice that this student, whether through is through the letter or on your student database system there at the college that the student needs these accommodations. And a big thing here is the very first slide is that 504 for private schools that do not receive federal dollars, they do not have to follow the 504 obligations. And that's big where I'm at. And a lot of this presentation is going to be, going over to the stuff, the information from my experiences. But I know if you are a private school, if you do not accept title funds or special, lunch, federal funding and free and reduced lunch, whatever it may be, then you're not entitled to, you don't have any obligations to follow 504. So, all right. What is IDEA? So Individuals with Disabilities Act, and if I had to just, bottom line is it's the law of the line, the law of the land. It is the Bible of special education. It's been reauthorized several different times. There's 13 eligibility categories that you must qualify in, and there's very strict standards to qualify in those areas. And one of the big things about IDEAs is it provides specialized instruction and services, and where it's different than 504 here, this is a big difference because 504 is about accommodations and accessibility, making sure that students receive those accommodations if they had a substantial limiting life activity, and I'll go over those later on. But you have to take down those barriers that might prevent them from participating in an event or a program or class, whatever it may be. In IDEA also, if you're eligible, it requires an IEP, an individualized education program. If you qualify for 504, you don't, you necessarily, it depends but bottom line is you more than likely cannot access the programs, but you can access the services. And if you say, well, what does that mean? If you're eligible under speech and language, one of those ancillary services, speech and language, OTPT, you can receive those services at a private school. But as far as a resource room, hearing impaired, whatever it may be, it is the local district to respond or to provide those programming. All right. Once again, purpose of 504, equal access to education, making sure that the students can participate. What you can't do is you certainly cannot say that it's, I'll give you an example that the student cannot participate in this event or function because it's not accessible. And if you say, well, what might that be? Let's say graduation, walking across the stage. Well, he cannot do that because the student is in a wheelchair or he has CP. He can't, get up the steps, whatever it may be. You have to make sure that those barriers are eliminated and that student can participate. Also, another good example, from my own experience is we had a student, that he needed a catheter, and the school said, we just don't have the staff. We don't have the resources. Well, that would be something that's a barrier. And if you are accepting those federal dollars, then you have to adjust and provide those accommodations to make sure that that kid can participate in school. So another good example, I just wrote down a few things. if a student if bathrooms are on a certain floor, you have to make sure that the student can use those bathrooms and so on. Um, you have to eliminate any of those barriers that prevents him from accessing. Um, and it's focusing on those accommodations and supports tailored to that individual. So, all right, purpose of IDEA, the number one column there, provide free and appropriate public education. Yep, it's free. I think the big thing there is free. In Michigan, it's birth to 26. You have an IFSP until you're reach the age of 3 or before you reach the age of 3. And then you have an IEP. And yes, we are, like I said, we go to 26. No cost to the parents. That's the F in FAPE. Appropriate public education. Parents are awarded procedural safeguards, which is you have a lot of rights as a parent. If in going back to the free and FAPE, if the IEP team decides that, hey, you know what, this kid, they need an interpreter or they need an aid is a big thing here in Michigan. But if they need an aid, the district cannot say, well, we have had, our millage didn't pass, whatever it may be, we can't afford to hire an aid. It is at no cost to the parent. So the big thing here too is the middle column there, delivery of specialized instruction. In our Michigan administrative rules for special education, teachers have to be trained in certain areas. And it's just not coaching. And I see that a lot on IEPs and where a student is checking in or the teacher is actually just coaching the student, helping them, building up their self-confidence, whatever it may be. And a lot of times I have, maybe they're meeting with them 10 minutes at the end of the day. It doesn't fall underneath the definition of specialized instruction. So, a lot more than a 504 plan. And then the last one, it says focus on educational benefit and progress. Bottom line is for IDEA, the student needs to be making educational progress, and they call that educational benefit. And how do you decide that as a team? What happens is, and based on my experience in court cases and so on, and with advocates, is what we do is we get together and we go through the last 3 IEPs. And if anybody needs information more on the educational benefit process, you can Google it, or my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. I did have Felicia, I did have a comment that these slides aren't being shared with the group. I just want to make sure they are, I guess.
If the slides will be shared with the group, you mean like at the end of the presentation?
Oh, they don't see them during?
They don't see them now?
Yeah, that's what. Oh, somebody said I see them.
Yeah, because they should be seeing them.
I see them. Looks like
Yeah.
everybody else is seeing them. Must be one person.
Yeah, that maybe just doesn't see them.
I am only seeing what's your slide say right now, Jeff?
It says purpose of
Purpose.
IDEA, and it has 3
Oh,
columns.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah,
That's what I see.
yeah, yeah. So you should be good.
All right, I'm going to move on. All
Okay,
right.
yeah, keep going. You're good.
IDEA, once again, it focuses on bottom line. Bottom line, IDEA, was the IEP calculated, reasonably calculated for ed benefit? And there's a whole process. That could be another webinar for education associates, because throughout my whole career, 30 years, the ed benefit review is probably the most important thing ever, to keep you out of litigation, but also making sure that we have the best programming set up for the student. So I mentioned also in that middle column, and I forgot to mention this, delivery of specialized instruction. You know, our teachers, are they trained in Orton Gillingham? Do they have sensory type training? PBIS, differentiated instruction is probably the biggest. Are they using hands-on? Do they know how to modify, adapt the curriculum, and so on? And unfortunately, I'll probably go over this again in another slide. The issue here right now is we have so many staff shortages, and to find people that are appropriately trained, it's a huge issue. So, yeah, we'll move on to the next slide. It says eligibility differences. Section 504, very broad definition. Physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, such as, and I bet every one of us would qualify for a 504 plan, but when I read these off, and I read some of them, you know, one of these major life activities, such as concentrating, thinking, communicating, major bodily functions, learning, walking, seeing, hearing, breathing, working, reading, speaking, bending, lifting, standing, eating. I could go on. There is a ton of them. But IDEA, you have to meet the criteria of 13 of these categories. And I will go over those later on in the presentation. Section 504, just the overview, you know, overview of 504, support students with disabilities. They may have a disability, they may not. But if they don't qualify for special ed services or specialized instruction, they may need just supports and accommodations only. And this is where 504 you can use to your advantage. If a kid, I mentioned this story at the beginning of the webinar, if the kid does not qualify, there's other ways we can support that student. In substantially limited major life activity, and who decides that? Who decides a major life activity and does it substantially limit? You can find all kinds of 504 plan basic documents, but it'll take you through a procedure where the team sits down and you ask questions about the student to decide if it does substantially limit a major life activity. The bottom provides accommodations, not specialized instruction. Yeah, once again, IDEA requires specialized instruction. 504 is more, it is about accommodations. We're going to skip to the next slide. All right, common disabilities that may qualify, and I'll go into these more in depth. But this is once again for 504. You know, any type of cognitive learning, ADHD, and I see the rest of those, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. You know, diabetes, we have kids that have to have their sugar checked at certain times of the day. 504 plans, anxiety, I mentioned that about the student at the end. But it just gives you a brief overview of things that may qualify. So this slide, if you say, well, why is this important to me? If I'm somebody that's just been recently assigned to a 504 coordinator position, which I saw there's few on the chat, these are things that you have to pay attention to. And if a parent brings up the fact that their kid has diabetes and needs to check it every 2 hours, you need to provide the flexibility to have that kid go down and check his sugar or whatever it may be. So, Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to move on here. Once again, based on impact, just not diagnosis. Is it something that is substantially, the top bullet there, is it something that is substantially affecting the student? They do not need a formal diagnosis. We don't need a doctor's note. We don't need something from CMH. In the big thing on this slide, the temporary conditions may apply. And it says condition or concussions, injury, recovery. And I'll give you a good example. I had a student that he was in an awful accident and the school needed to provide, and it was a private school and they did accept federal funds. So they needed to follow through with 504, but the kid was in almost a full body cast. And once again, he needed he needed to be cathed, and he had a ton of other things that he needed accommodations to get around the school building. And it's only temporary for maybe 3 to 6 months. And so it doesn't mean, usually with IDEA and special ed services, you usually don't not qualify unless you're speech and language and so on. That's a whole nother issue. But anyways, it could be just a temporary issue. So advantages of Section 504, more flexible. Yep. Less timelines. It can change, and it can change often. Broader eligibility. I read those off a little while ago. I mean, it covers so many things. I mean, thinking, bending, lifting, any type of bodily fluid, and so on. You do not have to fit into those 13 categories. And a lot of times in these IEP meetings, we get into these conversations with the 13 categories, which category best fits the kid. Well, is he CI? Is he EI? Is he ASD? And this is nice because it's a lot broader eligibility. You can give them services a lot quicker and so on. Less paperwork. You don't have to do progress. You don't have to do 30-day placements. Progress reports, I already mentioned that. Invitations, notifying, the transition agencies that will be involved. It's just, there's so much less paperwork. Quick implementation. So many times with the IDEA, and this is the biggest complaint I get as I had as a teacher, as I had as a administrator, is it takes so long. We did this RTI, we did this, we did child study, we did, we have documented that the student's been exposed to appropriate instruction. From step one of an IEP usually to the end result, it takes a while, just depending on the needs and the certain circumstance. And once again, like at the beginning of the slideshow, one size does not fit all. That's it. I mean, every situation is not the same, but sometimes it takes so darn long. And whether or not I agree or disagree, I'm just telling you, it can take a long time, because I personally believe it's yeah, heck yeah, let's try to do whatever we can do to provide those supports and help the student as soon as possible. So disadvantages of Section 504. Disadvantages, yeah, less structure, which gives you, it's an advantage. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Gives you some flexibility, which is nice. It's less structured, but 504 plans fall apart because there's a huge lack of training and awareness amongst staff. Staff don't understand their obligations under 504. Also poor communication. 504 plans fall apart because of poor communication, less structure when I see that, because you have to have meetings with IDEA at least annually, once a year. Then you're meeting usually the ancillary staff with the special ed teacher, gen ed teacher, so on, for progress reports at least 3 to 4 times a year, depending on when those are reported out. But poor communication. There's staff changes. Whether it's administration, teachers, and so on. And a lot of times there's budget constraints with kids receiving 504, especially at the private schools, right? And then just a failure to monitor. Who's going to monitoring this? Who's going to monitor these plans and adjust it as the child's needs change? And once again, I know we have some 504 coordinators on here. And that's a big one is failure to monitor and make sure the plan is implemented. So my advice to those individuals, if you're not an expert in 504s, is to make sure, hey, number one, what kids do we have on a 504? When's the last time we've looked at them? When's the last time we adjusted them? Because you do not want a complaint filed to the Office of Civil Rights. You don't want it. And bottom line is it's best for the kid also. So, no specialized instruction, because it's focused on accommodations. You don't have to make sure staff are trained. You don't have to document. You don't have to say, my gosh, this kid, needs this type of specific training, but our teacher has been trained and so on. It's just and once again, the disadvantage of the 504, if I have a student that's sitting in a classroom and no teachers are trained, and whether it may be visual schedules, whether it may be any type of communication issue, they do not have to follow those requirements. So am I saying you shouldn't pursue a 504? No, but I'm just making you aware of it. They're not obligated, where under IDEA, they're public schools, they are. So. All right. So plan differences. This is kind of just a summary. I mean, 504 plan, bottom line, if somebody asks you tomorrow on the street, 504 plan, why would I need a 504 plan? A 504 plan covers accommodations and supports. And if they say, well, what does IDA do? It guarantees you're going to have goals, services, accommodations, progress monitoring, and the teachers will be trained in specialized instruction. I mentioned earlier in the slides about the 13 categories that you're eligible under IDEA, and underneath 504, there's so many areas that you can qualify under. Once again, if it's substantially limiting one of those life activities. But these are the 13 areas that you can qualify under IDEA. I have to take a drink here, but in Michigan, our top 5, number 1, and I'm sure this is the same in many other states. Number 1 area to qualify under is a speech and language. Number 2 is SLD, specific learning disability. Number 3 is otherwise health impairment. Otherwise health impairment, OHI. Number 4 is autism. And then number 5 is an intellectual disability, which in Michigan is cognitively impaired or severely multiply impaired or moderately cognitively impaired. But those are the 5 areas in Michigan that are the most highest. eligibility categories. So, all right. This is just a very simple, once again, the title of this presentation was, for beginners, but a student case study. Just a student with dyslexia is significantly below grade level. For IDA, this may not be, this wouldn't be a student that would necessarily qualify for 5 services. But a student profile, a student with dyslexia supports, he's got to have specialized instruction. We're going to have IEP goals and objectives that specifically align with that area of need. And we're going to progress monitoring, and that's something different. IDEA between 504, we don't have to necessarily progress monitor, but it is definitely a best practice. So similarities, both protect students with disabilities, both require evaluations. 504, you sit down as a team, you evaluate the student. IDEA, it's a lot more in depth. As far as timelines, 504, as far as an evaluation, it says, but within a reasonable amount of time. IDEA, you have specific timelines that you have to meet. The third column there, both provide FAPE, and the main thing there is it's free. And the big thing there, the fourth column, you must have parent participation. All right, so just some key differences. Section 504, civil rights law, to make sure kids aren't discriminated, based on one of those substantial life activities, and the result is accommodations. IDEA is an education law, the law of the land. It's been revised several times, but the major thing is it's talking about specialized instruction and services, and instruction, what's specialized, once again, making sure the teacher's trained in differentiated instruction, sensory things, PBIS, and those things are usually found within the school or a resource room or so on. So, advantages of IDEA, you have strong legal protections. You have strong legal protections. You can't, as a parent, the school district cannot, predetermine and say, yes, little Johnny, yes, he does qualify for emotionally impaired. His behavior is awful, and so on. You have to meet those, eligibility requirements and so on. And you have to make sure you can, as a school district, just obviously make the kid eligible without parent participation and so on. Individualized goals, yep. There's lots of timelines or progress reports. 504, you don't have goals. You don't have individualized goals saying, hey, we're going to decrease the anxiety rate to 50% by this certain date and so on. And then access to specialized instruction. I mentioned this several times. Yeah, your staff needs to be trained, and they need to be trained appropriately in just several different areas. But usually, you do not find that under kids that are on 504 plans. And access to specialized instruction. Oops, I've said that. Yep. Progress monitoring. Once again, advantages of IDEA. Is the kid making progress? Do we have the appropriate documentation? And those are things that you report on depending on what age of the kid or what time or when progress reports go home. But those are things you report on, at least I'm just guessing 3 to 4 or 5 times throughout the year. Um, um, Disadvantages of IEPs, or I'm sorry, IDEA. There's a lot more paperwork. Our IEP, probably just in general, the IEP I would say is about 18 pages long. You have invites, you have progress reports, and then if the kid gets into behavioral issues, you have MDRs, manifestation determination reviews. There's so much paperwork. And then the strict eligibility. You have to meet the criteria for IDEA. If you have a medical diagnosis from a doctor or a CMH worker that says, "Hey, this kid definitely he is autistic. He was in our office today." You can consider that information, but that certainly does not mean that kid is eligible for services under IDEA as an ASD student. So, and then time-consuming process, and this is, yeah, it's time-consuming. I've been to 504 plans, and we have a specific, just a small document that takes care of everything you need to, but it's going to be usually at least 1 hour unless it's just a speech and language student. But you get those kids that are more involved. If you have speech and language services, if you have occupational services, parent concerns, the whole process, it depending on who's running the meeting, but it can take up to a couple hours. And if you have an advocate there, if it can be a time-consuming process. Common mistakes in IEP: goals are not measurable. This is absolutely huge. I used to be a monitor for several years. It's old data. There's no numerical data, quantifiable. There's no way to really measure the measurement. Several different goals or several different skills in one goal. And the worst part about it is a lot of times, your goals are based on the present level statements, the PLAF. And a lot of times teachers will use generic terms like "in my opinion," or "I think," or "I feel," or "he does," or "he doesn't," without the numerical data, which leads to inconsistency whether or not the student did or did not make progress. The second one there, services are not aligned with needs. And if you say, "My gosh, what does that mean?" Hopefully, I'll give you a good example. When I was monitoring, this would happen a lot. The kid is eligible under LD, learning disabled in math, and throughout the years, all of a sudden the kid, he's all of a sudden eligible under writing, not eligible according to the MET and but all of a sudden the IEP team decides that he's eligible under writing. They're going to give him support, and then reading, and then the kid's in the resource room for half the day. And I've also seen where kids, and once again, I'm talking about services not aligned with the needs. I've also seen kids where on their IEPs, they're working on grade level, or they're functioning based on progress reports. They're functioning at grade level. The student doesn't need to be pulled out into a resource room when he can function in the gen ed classroom, which is our least restricted environment, obligation. And then poor progress monitoring, just simply, not having the data there. I got several of these notes, but I'm going to continue on. Private school obligations under IDEA, they have under IDEA, they have limited obligations. Public schools must provide equitable services, and all that means is you cannot at a private school, if a kid is going to receive 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a month for speech and language, you cannot say that while he goes to the private school, we're going to deny him that. He's only going to receive half that time, whatever it may be. No individual entitlement to FAPE. Well, in private schools, it is the F in FAPE is for private schools. Yeah, it's free. But just super quick, bottom line, if you're in a private school, what happens is the private school brings up the concern that the student may have a disability that results in testing. Then it is the public school to offer the student FAPE an IEP, whether it be in a resource room, a program over at the public school, but they are entitled to ancillary services, speech and language, and OTPT, whatever it may be. So, all right, all right, well, this is just a quick slide. Private schools and Section 504 core obligations. Once again, I guess the big thing there is it's no automatic right to an IEP. You have to go through the eligibility criteria, the process, and so on. One of the questions that come up to me a lot is can Johnny receive, he's at a private school, we accept federal funds. Can he go over to the resource room for a certain point of the day, for a certain time of the day, to maybe receive specialized instruction? This is probably the question that comes up the most to me. And I know some, and I'm from Michigan. I know some schools, if you're like K through 5 or that elementary level, K through 7, whatever it may be, they may work out a plan with the private school, but we don't do that because they're on a different, when I say we, our intermediate school district, because they're on a whole different scope and sequence and so on of the curriculum. So we don't do it. You can't just go to the private school all day and then receive your special ed services at the public school. Now, I do know that kids, certainly they can take those advanced placement courses and things like that. But as far as special ed, I know in our district or our ISD, it's not, and that's from straight from our attorney also, because this has come up several times. So this was just a 504, the student with ADHD struggles with focus and so on, needs time. A simple 504 case. What can we do? We can put, change the seating, extended time, breaks during work, anything, just a very simple plan. No specialized instruction needed. A lot of times when I see these 504 plans, and it's my personal opinion, once again, it's just good teaching. It's just accommodating. And but a lot of times we do get people that dig their heels in, say, I'm not doing that. And this is a way to put it in writing that, yes, we are going to do it. So, all right. Once again, private schools obligations, limited obligations. You have to provide this similar services, and you don't have access to the same resources that you do if the student has an IEP. Key takeaways that I'd like to, 504 is more about, focusing on, removing barriers, IDAs, specialized instruction. Both are important, and for my key takeaway here is if a kid doesn't qualify for services under IDA, if a kid does not qualify for IDA services, special ed, there's other ways we can support that student, and that's through a 504. And that's how I started this presentation. That's how I'm going to end it. Is it's not the end of all that, oh my God, what else are we going to do? And, document. And if you say, well, why? I mean, it's just good practice, and it benefits the kids. If we tried these interventions and so on, and they're not working, it's just good practice. But the number one problem or issue I find, whether or not, if you remember anything from this presentation, please remember this. Here in Michigan, and I'm sure it's the same in other states, the number one litigation issue, you may have the most awesome 504 plan and an IEP, but if it is not implemented correctly, it doesn't mean anything. So for those of you who are 504 coordinators, I would try to find out who has a 504 plan and see if it's been implemented. A lot of times I'll go to a district and they don't know. I think he was on a 504. Yeah, he was a couple years ago. And that's going to get you in trouble. And it's not about getting you in trouble. It's about what's the most important thing for the kid. If these supports aren't in place, the kid is not going to, he's not going to excel and do well. So I think Felisa has my contact information. I have some basic plans. There's only one super quick, one last thing. I went on a website, and I went over hundreds of websites within the past month. And there's the Ultimate 504 Accommodation Toolkit by Dr. David Bateman. The Ultimate 504 Accommodation Toolkit. It lists every scenario with accommodations I didn't even think about. So that's my recommendation. Take your time and if you can, go over that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jeff. I had a couple of questions. First, he did mention something about visual schedules, and just so you know, we provide visual schedules in all of our adapted kits. So we do have that with every single one of our titles. So those are awesome resources for students for sure. One question that I had, because I see this as a lot as a gen ed teacher, was what's a good way to document 504 that they're moving through the progress? Because you were like, it doesn't mean anything if we're not implementing it. Well, what's a good way so that I can document that progress and show that they're moving through the system?
Felisa, that's a good question, but I think if you did a simple Google document and you have that baseline data, that's so important. And even with an IEP, a lot of times the baseline data is inaccurate or it's old and cut and paste. But if I was a teacher and they said that the student needed more time on test, I would simply make a Google Doc, say, hey, on this certain date, Jenny answered, I'm trying to throw this out in simplest terms.
Yes.
She answered
I think-
5 out of 6 questions, or 5 out of 10 questions.
Mm-hmm.
I gave her 2 minutes extra time. She answered 8 out of 10 or whatever. It took her 15 minutes. And if you can document that, and if she did well answering those questions, then, you know, and once again, I come from a bit different background where I'm trying to prevent litigation. I don't want to get into the court with certain situations, but in all reality, when you think about it, it's what is flat out best for the student.
And one thing that I used to have my teachers do with 504, Jeff, was they would write on the assessment what the accommodation was that was offered. And that way the parents would get a copy of it. They'd see that that was offered. And then we start high school students, Jeff. I don't know, did you have this where they refuse the accommodation? And so then you got to document that, and parents would say, no, they didn't. So we would have the student sign a document saying they refused it. You know, I mean, it's just about documenting what you're attempting to do for the kids. Jeff, you did a really great job kind of explaining all those
really.
components.
Yeah. Did you look through the questions, Jennifer, and see? I didn't
Yes.
look through and see if we had anything in there.
Yeah, they mostly are we going to get the slides, and the slides are always posted, and the webinar itself will be published, so you'll be able to access that at the on our webpage, and I think we put a link in the newsletter.
And if you registered for this, you'll get all that information, where to go and the links and all of that stuff, because you'll get all of this, the slides, everything. You'll get all of that stuff because you registered. So awesome. I agree with Jennifer. You just did an amazing job. I was like, yeah, I don't really have any questions because he's answering them as you were going through it. And so something that I think is just really powerful is being able to get your gen ed teachers in the same room with your teachers that are planning these IEPs and the 504, so that we can clearly understand what it is that you need from us, because sometimes they're not in that resource room. They're spending the whole entire time with me. And so I need to know, as a gen ed teacher, this is what you need to do so that I can help you be better prepared.
So I'm just curious, are we the only ones on right now?
Oh, no. Oh, no. Yeah, no. We're getting people responding and agreeing and everything as we're going. No,
Jennifer, I love your idea once again, and I've heard that too, of having the kid find something that says, yes, I received these accommodations. And I told here, if we still have people on, even a Google, and I know this is my admin above me would probably cringe if they heard me say this, but I've told teachers, they're busy, and I said, even if you're driving home, have your cell phone, text it to your email. I read the story with Jimmy today. We did this, we did that. And then whatever you can do just to document those accommodations.
The more you document, the better. That's absolutely true.
An investigator, but that's better than nothing.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
So,
that's right.
Here's the thing. We do so many things as educators to accommodate and to help these kids. And a lot of times, I did it myself. We forget about it, and you need to document stuff to say, hey, I did this, I did that.
So, Jeff, thank you again. We've got to get finished with the webinar. We have less than a minute.